since we own the newspaper, I thought I should make it clear that we are neutral in the Iowa caucuses. So we're happy to host the event, but we are neutral. Now, one place we're not neutral is when we find a fierce advocate for rural Iowa, and we have a fierce advocate for rural Iowa here today, in my friend Congressman Ro Khanna. So thank you for being here today, Congressman. Politics and corporate consolidation have really split rural and urban America. And it's my belief, I know it's the Congressman's belief, that the way we can stitch rural and urban back together isn't by sort of poll-tested messaging, press releases, or just more savagery from the blue America aimed at red America. That the way we do it is by jobs, jobs, jobs. So the wealth that's been vacuumed out of our part of the country to Seattle, Silicon Valley, that the way to build that bridge back between rural and urban is to see some of that digital wealth spread back to places like Jefferson, Carroll. Congressman Khanna has been very active on that. I've been involved in economic development, as a lot of you know, for about 20 years. The single most impressive economic development event that I've seen in that time is when Congressman Khanna worked with Chris Deal, Link Kroger, and others from Jefferson with that event on December 8th. That was terrific. It inspired me and gave me a lot of hope that we can rebuild this part of the country. So, wanted to introduce Congressman Khanna, thank him for being here, thank him for being a friend, and thank him for being, in many ways, Western Iowa's second congressman.
Thank you. That was one of the nicest introductions, and I want to first recognize Doug Burns for being just such a great journalist. And he's described as the Walter Cronkite of rural newspapers across Iowa at a time where the newspaper business is a tough business. And so I think Doug is an entrepreneur in his own right. And let's give him a round of applause for journalism and to democracy. Thank you to Ann Wilson. Where is Ann? Thank you for opening your beautiful home and the hospitality. Let's give her a round of applause. I want to recognize a few other people and then make some remarks and really save time for more of a conversation. Link Kroger has become a great friend, and Chris Deal Link, with the vision that he's had on Jefferson and to bring pillar technology along with Des Moines Community College and Silicon Valley, has just an extraordinary vision for rural America. And I think our work is just beginning. So thank you, Link, for being here. Thank you, Chris, for the investment you made. I think it'd be great to have a new senator, new congressman. I don't know what, but we need JD's voice. And I appreciate my friend Prakash, who's the head of the Asian and Latino Roundtable, driving in, and so many people driving in from across the state. Let me start with this. I am very optimistic about the future of our country. At a time where we've seen a denigration of discourse, at a time where people are attacking each other, and it seems that we can't find the common inspiration that we once had, I remain optimistic. Let me start with why. My grandfather spent 4 years in jail in Gandhi's independence movement. My parents came here in the 1960s. I was born in 1976 in Philadelphia, bicentennial year. I grew up with, in a county, Bucks County Community College. It was probably the only Indian American in a county of, about 400,000 people. Went to public school. On our street, we had, my dad was an engineer, mom was a substitute school teacher. We had a plumber, we had a nurse, we had a big shot executive, but everyone played same Little League, everyone had the same teachers. There was a sense of belief in the possibility. And even though I had a different name, different background, I had a lot of people who believed in me back in the 1970s, 1980s, to the point that I got elected as a first-generation immigrant to represent arguably the most powerful economic district in the world. You can't have my story and not believe in the promise of this country, in the fundamental goodness and decency of people across this nation. But something is off, and what's off is that this nation and our world, we're facing a technology revolution and globalization. And in this technology change, the promise of a technology, the promise of the spreading of information was that everyone would have a better opportunity, that you no longer had to go necessarily to work in a particular place or move to a particular place. Technology was going to spread opportunity everywhere. And people actually could live in communities which they loved and be able to work. That was supposed to be the hope. That was the aspiration. And yet what we have seen instead is an agglomeration of wealth and an agglomeration of opportunity. Now, JD was telling me just over coffee that in Iowa State, 1,400 people graduate in technology. Does anyone want to take a guess? He knows the answer. How many people stay in Iowa? 238. You know, they used to talk about a brain drain. When I started hearing that term in Iowa, I said, my parents talked about that leaving India. I didn't think they would talk about a brain drain in America. And so you have a situation where people can't grow up and live in the communities that they love, that they're being forced to leave for economic opportunity. And politicians often, they come by and say, oh, we just need to help you have security or make it in the middle class and give you a little bit of a economic handout, support, aid, and I'm all for a lot of the economic social programs, don't get me wrong. But that's not enough. We are an aspirational people. Our nation is an aspirational nation. You can't just say to folks, oh, all the wealth and creativity is going to be done somewhere and you're going to get a check and be fine. Places like Iowa built America. We've got to tell people you can have the future. You have to be part of the future. You can have that opportunity in your communities. And by the way, we don't have a person to waste in this country or a community to write off. We're competing with a nation 1.4 billion in China. 3 times the population of the United States. At its peak, at the Soviet Union, at the peak of the Soviet Union was perhaps a third of our population. And you know what China is doing? This is, if you let me digress for a minute, because I was just seeing President Carter. What an extraordinary opportunity of I had interned for him, and several of us went down after he had his hip surgery to hear him teach Sunday school. There's this, and whatever you think of your politics, President Carter is an extraordinary human being. And if you ever want to know what drove him, his values, he was from rural America. Go visit Plains, Georgia. I mean, he took Plains, Georgia with him. And Carter said that President Trump called him. President Trump called him and asked him, he said, I'm concerned about China. And I want to know, what should we do? You know what President Carter said? He was very gracious. President Carter didn't, we were in church, so you couldn't really criticize the president. But he, was very gracious. He said, here's what I told the president. China hasn't been in a war since 1979. We've been in 40 wars since then. China is spending its money, 18,000 miles of high-speed rail, every part of the country in China, 40 billion going into every part being hooked up to high-speed internet. Every part. For 1 year in Afghanistan, we could hook up the entire country to fiber for 1 year. China is spending its money on technology institutes across this country. If you want to help make sure we're ahead of China, make sure that we're investing in this nation. investing in the communities across this nation. There is no reason that every community in this country can't be part of the digital revolution, and that there can't be more opportunity and more choice in communities across this country. It's a matter of policy. Let me give you a concrete example. We're working with Doug Burns and Carroll. They're working on having a Lincoln corridor with Lincoln corridor on technology. Well, there is this extraordinary technology on robotics processing administration. It's a complicated term for if you're ever, how many people have had the experience when you're calling someone or you're online, you know on the other side there's not a human being. Raise your hand. All right. Well, the people who program that, actually, a lot of that is trainable. And a lot of, these big words, artificial intelligence. A lot of artificial intelligence it actually requires people to sit there and identify patterns, and those jobs are accessible to many, many people. Here's the problem. Our country isn't focused on bringing those jobs into rural America or into parts of the country where they should be. And if we don't focus on that, I can guarantee you in 4 years those jobs aren't going to be in the United States. They're going to be in China and India and Brazil and every other part of the world. But if we make the investment of creating tech hubs across this country, of making the investment in the right type of training that actually leads and credentialing that leads to a job, you can have $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 jobs, not even requiring a college degree, in communities across this country in the technology of the future. And that's what I think extending the digital revolution is about. In Jefferson, what we're doing is partnering with technology companies and Pillar Technology, Accenture, to help people get $65,000 jobs after 2 years of training. And they get to stay in Jefferson, Iowa. They don't have to leave. They get to stay with their families. Now, Father's Day's coming up. I get why you would want to make sure you're with your parents and you're with your uncles and you're in communities in terms of where you want to live. My wife and I, we don't have that luxury. My parents are in Pennsylvania, hers are in Cleveland. We're between California and DC. We got 2 young kids. It's not a way to raise a family. I mean, we may do. I'm very proud of my kids. But people want to live in the communities they grew up in. Our message as Democrats should be very simple. We're going to bring the future jobs to communities across America. The president's promising the past. Fine, you can vote for him and others. Do you really think people in this country believe that his vision is the vision of the future? I'll tell you, young people don't, but he convinces them that he cares. First, we've got to say we care, and then we've got to say we can help you be part of the future, and your future is going to have more choice, more opportunity. We've done this as Americans. We've done this before. In the 1957, when Sputnik went up, what did we do? We didn't just say, okay, we got the Cold War won. We never said that. We said we're going to mobilize in this nation. We had 3% of our GDP going into science and technology. We mobilized science and technology. We had people like my parents come in with engineering degrees. We said, we want them here. If they're going to be contributing to America and technology, we want them in the United States. China didn't say that. The Soviets didn't say that. We had the best and brightest from around the world. We invested in research universities. We invested in every part, in infrastructure in this country. We won because we had vision. We won because we weren't afraid of leading the future. This country is desperate for a new vision in America to lead that 21st century. They're tired of the politics. They're tired of the division. They're tired of the anger and the slogans. They want something real in what is going to prepare us for the 21st century. If you give me a few moments of why I think Bernie Sanders is one of those leaders who will be the next president. The biggest thing we ought to stop doing is getting into unconstitutional wars. Guess how much these wars have cost us? $6 to $7 trillion. Since 2000 itself. Think about that for a minute. Who thinks that an extra year in Afghanistan does more for our national security than having every person in this country hooked up to high-speed internet? People say, how are you going to pay for free college tuition? 2 years of Afghanistan will pay for it, $80 billion. Not because of a moral issue. I'll tell you, having every person have free college tuition in this country is going to do more to make sure America leads the 21st century than 2 more years in Afghanistan, which no empire, no country has ever won. Bernie Sanders understands that we can't get into more wars that aren't in our national interest. Our GDP is 24% of the global economy. I actually agree with the president that our competition, President Trump, that our competition will be China. I disagree that we should have a Cold War, but I agree with that. But that's our competition, 15% of GDP. Does anyone know what Iran's GDP is? Take a guess. 0.55%. If you were just thinking, and think of those brilliant people who helped America win the Cold War, if they were looking at this and they say, okay, China's our main competition, China's not getting into war anywhere, we're 24% of GDP, they're catching up, who says that the right answer is let's go make war with a country that's 0.55% of global GDP? The entire Middle East is 3.5%. First thing we ought to do is stop getting into these unconstitutional wars, and Bernie Sanders and I led the Yemen resolution to stop the war and aiding the Saudis in bombing Yemen, which is contributing to a war in the Middle East with Iran. Second thing about Bernie Sanders, you can clap at the end. Second thing about Bernie Sanders, Medicare for all. Medicare for all is not just a moral issue, though it is a moral issue. I think everyone has to have health care. It's an economic issue. Our economy spends 19% on health care. It's what China spends, 5%. One of the main reasons companies are outsourcing jobs is because they can't afford the health care costs. Every family spends about $12,000 for a family of 4 on health care. That's the average. It goes up and down depending on regions and states. About $5,000 on deductibles. Guess what the employer spends? About $12,000 that the employer has to spend on that healthcare system. And who makes out? Well, the CEO and the pharmaceuticals and the insurance companies, sure, they're making a lot of profits. But the result has been that wages have been stagnant for 30 years. Why have wages been stagnant? There are a lot of reasons. The biggest reason is that money is going into healthcare. Employers are saying, look, I'm paying for their benefits. I can't give them a raise. We want to raise worker wages in this country. If we want to raise pay, we've got to get rid of the healthcare costs. And this idea that Medicare is going to take away your choice is just false. It's just false. Here's the basic plan. Everyone gets basic healthcare. Everyone gets basic Medicare. There's a fee. Obviously, things don't come for free. You have to pay something. It always drives me crazy when I hear Republicans say that Medicare for all is going to cost $32 trillion. How many of you have heard that? And then what they don't tell you is that the current system costs $49 trillion. I'm saying, obviously, yeah, someone has to pay the doctors and nurses in hospitals. No one's saying it's free. The question is what costs more? And it's common sense that if you get rid of the excessive insurance profits and pharmaceutical profits and hospital profits, you're going to bring down costs, not increase costs. Well, so everyone gets basic health care. You have to pay a nominal fee, and you get your basic dental and vision and basic health care, and now you don't have those high deductibles. And you know what? If you really love your insurance, you can still keep it and have supplemental under Bernie's plan. No one's saying you don't get to keep it. They're just saying try the Medicare stuff, and if you really insist that you want more, you can have your supplemental health care insurance. That's not banned under Bernie's bill. But here's what I know. Most people will say, I actually really like the Medicare you're giving me. Now, there'll be some very rich people. They always want to have some fancy distinction. Just like you want a fancy car, maybe they'll have fancy insurance as a supplemental. That's nothing wrong with that. But everyone would get basic health care, and they'd be able to move their jobs. A point about education. The third reason about Bernie Sanders, and then I'll end and open it up for questions. in a global economy where our competition is the rest of the world, we need to be educated. That's so obvious, it's amazing we're still arguing about that. Who thinks that what's going to win against lead America in the 21st century is taking a military budget that's 9 times the rest of the country, other countries combined, and adding more to it, as opposed to putting money in our K through 12 education and in our preschool education and in our higher education and apprenticeship education, and making sure every person, regardless of race or background, has those skills and has technology proficiency. We were talking about farming while I came in. You talk to farmers, they're some of the most sophisticated people in terms of technology. They're some of the most creative. They understand farming in the 21st century is going to require significant technology, and their kids and next generation are going to have to understand technology to be able to succeed. Link and I were talking about Blue River in Silicon Valley, this technology company that now on your tractors allows you to, with sensors, tell whether you're going to put some of the fertilizer on weeds or on crops. That's technology. I don't know, I have not met yet a single person in this country, maybe there's some, who say, you know what, we shouldn't have more education. We shouldn't, the most disingenuous speech of the entire Republican convention in 2016, and there were so many of them, the most disingenuous one, the one that I thought was the dumbest speech, was Donald Trump's son standing up there demeaning college education, saying, oh, my dad, he doesn't believe in college education, he's with the workers, he's got the common touch. You know what I'm thinking to myself? How convenient. He went to Penn, everyone in his family gets to go to Penn, his father goes to Penn, but somehow college isn't good? Come on, give me a break. Everyone should get as much education as they possibly can in this country, if we're being honest. Doesn't mean everyone has to go to college. People can have different degrees. But make sure we are investing in being innovative. That's the only shot we have as a country of 350 billion people to stay ahead of countries with 1.4 billion, and to stay ahead of countries that have far bigger populations, and in some cases more natural resources. We've got to be the most innovative, educated nation in the world, and Bernie Sanders gets that. I'll end with what I was most moved in when I went to see President Carter 2 weeks ago. He asked the audience, so what does it mean to be a superpower? And different people were asking and giving different answers from the pews. Someone said have the strongest military. President Carter served in World War II and served in the Korean War. So he said, well, of course we need a strong military, but that's not what I have in mind. Someone said the most educated country. He said, no, I get that. And we kept going to finally someone said, well, you tell us, what do you think it means to be a superpower? President Carter said, imagine in Washington, in this country, where people around the world came to America because they knew that America would help them find peace, because they knew that America would help them build a more just world, because they knew that America would be a model for what it means to live a good life. His view was obviously deeply influenced by his own faith, but it was a view of America at its root, at our founding, a nation that would inspire the rest of the world because it embraced the deepest aspirations of human liberty, of human freedom, of a search for peace and justice. That vision is the vision that I believe we can attain in the 21st century, where we've got people literally in this country from every part of the world. Never happened in human history that any country could have people from around the world and have one nation dedicated to a vision of justice and human rights. And the question is, are we up for it? I'll tell you, every previous generation has been up for it in this country. They've risen to the challenge of winning World War II or winning the Cold War or building this country. And I think if we can extend the technology revolution, bring new jobs to communities across this country, have a sense of empathy and decency, get out of bad wars and invest in this country again, that we really can be that America that helps lead the world and is true to our founding vision. That's why I'm so passionate about this 2020 election. I'm passionate about making sure Bernie Sanders is in the White House, passionate about making sure we have a new, inspiring direction for this country. So with that, I'd love to open it up for your comments and questions and thoughts. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for being here, and thank you for all you've done, not only for rural Iowa and rural America, but for our economy in general. I want to ask you about the Medicare for All proposal. I served on the hospital board of trustees for a small rural hospital, and I know that most rural hospitals run from 2/3 to 80% of their patients are either on Medicare or Medicaid. And one of the issues they run into is that Medicare, for instance, only reimburses 80% of costs, and that doesn't even include all the costs that the hospital has. How is it going to work if we switch, and most hospitals, particularly in urban areas, make that up with private pay.
Yeah.
So how's that going to work if we switch to everybody being on Medicare?
Well, sir, you're absolutely right. I mean, most hospitals have a 55% private insurance subsidizes basically the Medicare costs because Medicare reimbursement isn't high enough. There are several things, though, I think that would happen. First, Bernie Sanders and Jim Clyburn, who's the majority whip, have a bill to actually have much more funding to rural hospitals. So we need direct federal funding to rural hospitals, rural community centers, to make sure that, especially if we had Medicare for all, that they're getting some source of federal funding so that you can have hospitals closer to where people live. Second, Medicare for all would reduce, I think, a number of the costs. They would reduce the pharmaceutical costs by allowing for direct negotiation. They would reduce costs of insurance, which is some of the costs that make hospitals so expensive. They would reduce in urban areas the hospital consolidation costs, facility fees, where if you go to a doctor and you get charged something, and then you go to a hospital and you get charged something, the hospital is almost 10 times as much. If you got the same MRI, that would be reduced. So you would have a reduction in costs with Medicare for all. So one, a greater investment. Second, a reduction of costs. Third, I think rural hospitals need to embrace technology so that they can figure out what is most urgent and what can they do elsewhere. In other words, it could be the case that we need every hospital to have urgent care, basic care, people being able to go if they have a heart attack, if they have some condition. But you may not need all of the analysis of someone's a CAT scan or MRI to be done right on site. That could be done in Des Moines, or it could be done somewhere else. And we have to think about how technology can be used in a smart way to have smart care in rural centers, and yet move some of the very expensive machinery work that may not be as sustainable into other places while allowing for excellent care. So I think you raise a very good point that we can't leave rural hospitals behind under the current system, but I think you would see a reduction of costs plus federal support plus technology that would allow rural hospitals to flourish. Do you have follow-up thoughts?
Well, I mean, we have critical access hospitals now. I mean, we wouldn't have most of the rural hospitals today, except that they get cost plus because they're critical access hospitals. And I guess my concern is we can't make every hospital in the country critical access. And, it's a complicated issue, and I don't expect you to answer all the ins and outs of it here today, but things like an MRI costs more in a hospital because the hospital is using these services to carry the expenses of having a hospital in a rural or an urban location. And there's definitely been a push among Republicans to try and privatize the high value services. We have these radiology centers, and we have these private ambulances that are really souped up taxi services, trying to take away the profit centers away from the hospitals and leaving them even more vulnerable. So I'm just worried about it. I believe in healthcare for all, and I just don't think it's as simple as saying, oh, we give everybody Medicare. I see some real challenges.
Yeah, and I think that I think you should look at Sanders' plan with Clyburn and some of the other Democratic candidates are on that, of rural hospitals and an investment heavily in rural hospitals by the federal government through aid and incentive to make sure that we are providing that support to the extent that they don't have those dollars. And right now, as you know, rural hospitals are often under threat economically, and so having more people come in and having more federal incentive and more federal dollars actually may help the economic case than what they currently face. But I'm happy to get your ideas afterwards. Yes, sir.
Congressman, it's been roughly 6 months since you and others from the Silicon Valley link came to Jefferson on that Saturday night.
Right.
Talked about the idea that you were considering. It's been great news for us, as Doug Burns said, the most exciting economic idea he's heard of in 20 years or whatever. Subsequent to that,
Yeah.
what have you heard from your constituents about that idea? I mean, you're in Silicon Valley.
Right.
And what are you hearing in other parts of the country about that idea of bringing that opportunity and focus to rural Iowa right now?
Yeah.
What kind of reaction did you get?
Well, let me say both very positive. I mean, there was an article in the Roanoke Times in rural Virginia. They said there's this guy out there, Ro Khanna. He's for Bernie Sanders. He's from the liberal Bay Area. We don't like anything really he stands for, but he's doing this great work on rural America, and so we want him to come out here to help see if we can have a partnership with technology. So I met with Morgan Griffith, who's this conservative Republican in representing rural Virginia. I'll give you an interesting thing which he told me. When Amazon was going to go out to Virginia, the polling showed that 62% of northern Virginia wanted Amazon, 38% didn't because they didn't want more traffic or headaches. 85% of rural Virginia wanted Amazon to go to northern Virginia because of the possibility of jobs and opportunity that would mean for people there. So around the country, I think there is this hunger to be part of the new economy and for it to be real, for it not to just be rhetoric, but that they want to know the proof points. They want to know, how are you actually going to do it? What does this mean in terms of the investments in this community? What does it mean in terms of jobs? Show us more proof points. That's why I think Jefferson is so critical in Carroll and Iowa. If we can't make it work in Iowa, it's going to be very hard to make it work in other states. Iowa has a lot of advantages, as you know. Iowa has a very extraordinary education system with the community colleges. Iowa has had a rich history in computers. It started in Ames. Bob Noyce was educated in Grinnell. Iowa has an emphasis on infrastructure that, it's not all fiber, and JD and I were talking about the importance of rural broadband, but it's much better than in many other states. So the point is that we can get it to succeed in Iowa, then there's a possibility that you could convince people in Appalachia or Mississippi or other parts of the country that it could succeed there. But if you can't get tech to rural to succeed in Iowa with all the advantages, it's going to be very hard to make the case elsewhere. In my district, I think people are they're waking up to it. But now, they have a little bit more more humility, and they understand that there was something off in this country where 6,000 millionaires are being created in my district or nearby because of Uber, and most Americans can just drive Uber. Every American has become a user in some way of technology. I mean, how many people here have bought something off of Amazon? How many people here have used Google? But not everyone is participating in the economy, of the production of that economy. This is very unusual. It doesn't usually happen that the next generation of technology is all being used and only certain parts of the country are participating. So I have gone blue in the face saying to them, you've got to reach out. And you can't just reach out asking for tax breaks. You can't just reach out putting data centers. You've got to reach out in a genuine belief that talent is everywhere. That there are a lot of people and work ethic that is in every part of the community, in every part of the country. And that if we want to harness the talent of America, we've got to partner with communities across America. And I think there's a greater and greater awareness that they're willing to engage and that they see the need to engage and that they see this as important in helping stitch this country back together. Yes, sir.
Do you think, so a lot of the technology is in your district,
Yes,
but a lot of the products are probably not, that I buy
yes,
off of Amazon, probably aren't built in your district.
No.
They're probably manufactured in other places around the world, one
Correct.
in China
yep.
and others. Do you see a vision or a future when we're manufacturing things like that in the United States? And why or why not?
So when I was in the Obama administration, I was working on how do we bring manufacturing back, and I wrote a book called Why Manufacturing Still Matters to America's Future, and what type of manufacturing can we bring back. I do think we can have advanced manufacturing and manufacturing hubs across this country. I don't think you're going to be able to lecture Tim Cook or berate him on Twitter and expect him to bring Apple's supply chains back to the United States. But Donald Trump's been president 3 years. He had a Twitter war with the GM CEO, keep the plants open in Lordstown. Didn't do much, the plants are still closed. He said Apple's going to build its new biggest factories in the United States. I haven't seen a single factory being built. So at some point, people are going to say, okay, enough with the sloganeering. What's really going to bring manufacturing jobs, and what are the type of manufacturing jobs we can do in the United States? In Lordstown, I'll tell you what we could do. The reason that those plants closed is because folks, people don't want sedans anymore. They want SUVs. I mean, that's just the buying preference of most Americans. Well, if you were to give a credit to say we should have electric SUVs, China's 50% of the electric vehicle market, and anyone guess what we are? 1%. Forget what you think about climate change. I mean, obviously I think climate change is a huge issue. But do you think there's any American, Republican or Democrat, who thinks we shouldn't be the leader in the industry of the future? I mean, since when was it an American value to cede the technology industry to another nation? You want to put those, you want to reopen American manufacturing and GM and put those Lordstown workers back to work? Have an electric vehicle refundable tax credit for electric SUVs. That will do far more than lecturing on Twitter the GM CEO, telling her go open jobs. You want to see what things that Apple can be made in the United States? Sit down with Tim Cook and say, okay, we have global supply chains, but I need you to produce more in the United States. What are the parts where we can have a strategic advantage? How do we invest in our community colleges and apprenticeships across America in different places so that we can incentivize you to create those parts with American manufacturers? What are the places you buy? Apple in my district spends $60 billion every year on domestic manufacturers. To put that in context, that's more than Montana's GDP. Sit down with them and say, what are the places where we can expand that? And how do we expand that in partnership with community colleges, universities, and research labs? And how do we create those advanced manufacturing hubs that are competitive in the United States? That doesn't make for an easy soundbite. It doesn't make for politics saying, oh, those companies are just offshoring our jobs and tell them go make their stuff in the United States. But you know what? At some point, people in this country, I think, are going to want real answers. When you go to a doctor, you don't care about their marketing. You care if they can actually do the heart surgery that you need and if it can be successful. I think this country, we're at a time where the country needs more thinkers, the country needs more nuance, the country needs more substance. They need to understand that people get it. They understand it's a global economy. They're sick of the false promises. And I think there is a way to have advanced manufacturing in the United States. but it's gonna require a sophisticated strategy of identifying the industries and having public-private partnerships with research universities to help do that, and having tax policy that incentivizes it.
Ro, we can do one more.
Yeah, sure. Well, let's do these two.
Yeah,
Good to
my
see you.
wife Patty and I spoke at Bernie's agricultural.
I saw that, I
rally.
remember.
Yeah, right. So I'd kind of like to offer a little bit deeper perspective on our economy. And that fact is that it's like inherent in our economy and many economies around the world historically, that it's important to the people at the top to extract resources as cheap as possible and to get labor as cheap as possible. And whatever happens to those resources or our environment, or whatever happens to the lives of those people that work for next to nothing, they're not concerned about that. And we haven't had any government to counter that for a long time. The New Deal was the only one that I know of. Okay, so, I mean, for instance, I went to protest the free trade agreements. I went to Cancun, Hong Kong, Geneva, you name it, all around the world, and I met with farmers from India, 800,000 farmers in there, 800 million farmers in their organization. And their farmers are leaving the land to go to cities like Delhi, where half of the people don't have running water or sewer. Okay, so this is a worldwide problem, and the unfortunate thing is that there is a Washington consensus. Both the Democrats and the Republicans supported that kind of free trade that exploits people in the countryside, gets them to come to the city to be cheap labor. So if you don't see that and realize that I tell people, well, right here in Iowa, we just didn't start out with mountains. But it's the same thing of extracting wealth from the land, just like the coal companies extract wealth from West Virginia and Tennessee, etc. So that is why Bernie supports parity, because the injustice, the wealth inequality starts when farmers deliver their product at less than their cost of production, and when workers work for less than a living wage. And I think that's what Bernie understands, and I think that's what we all need to understand, because the history is replete with wars where the people at the top wanted to get cheaper resources and cheaper labor.
Well, I agree with a lot of what you said. We don't have a disagreement. I mean, I think the trade agreements, which have not had unionization, which have not had labor standards, which have not had environmental standards, have led to a race to the bottom that has meant that corporations have benefited and workers haven't. And that's why NAFTA, in allowing China into the WTO, has led to a depression of wages with a lot of the corporations benefiting the most. And Senator Sanders stood up against those trade agreements and has continued to speak out against those trade agreements. He's also spoken out against the consolidation that you're talking about, and we were talking earlier that we needed to make sure that you don't have big corporate agriculture dominating the prices and dominating the industry, and it would be better to have a lot of smaller family farms that are able to compete and that has some subsidy if they necessary and price support. I mean, he spoke about that.
He wants actually a price, not a subsidy, not a government payment, because if you keep using payments to keep farmers in business, you're still keeping the cheap resource extraction in place.
Well,
So
he's
therefore,
come out from.
it's easier for a great big corporation like Smithfield here, a Chinese company that owns 25% of all the hogs in the United States. They don't have to raise any corn or soybeans, and they don't have to worry about soil erosion or what's going on in Sheridan, Iowa, or Jefferson, Iowa. They just get on the phone and order millions of cheap bushels of corn and soybeans.
Right, and he's talked about the need to use strong antitrust to break up Smithfield, which is Chinese owned, as you know. And he's talked about price parity in terms of a policy of $14 milk or $2 corn as a base. But I think his point is, to the extent they are subsidies, those have gone to the large companies and they haven't gone to family farmers.
I just
thanks for being here. It's great. I know when we were introduced before, I told you I'm the county party chair.
Yes.
One of the things I'm gonna have to do this coming election is knock on a lot of doors and make the case for whomever our party's nominee is for president. And, you know, I learned a lot doing that last cycle. I've talked to a lot of folks, you know, in this room who, I won't identify them, but the idea of voting for somebody who self-identifies as a socialist of any variety, really, makes them uncomfortable. I don't know if that's a generational thing or what, but it's real, and it's a concern. You know, call it electability, call it what you want to call it. So I'm wondering, you know, what would you say to someone like me who, should Senator Sanders become the nominee, I have to go out and make my case to someone on a doorstep. This is why I think Bernie Sanders is the person to lead our country into the future. So he has said, and I've listened to his speech that he gave on Wednesday twice, because I mean, I'm with him on we need the second coming of FDR. Doug can verify that for you. We've had that conversation multiple times. But I just don't know that there are people, even if they agree with that point of view, who are willing to say, you know what, I'm going to cast my ballot for someone who self-identifies as a socialist. You know, Bernie Sanders says that's been the word that has been thrown around against progressive policy since the Great Depression and long before.
Yeah.
So the historical precedent is they always say it's socialism, but it's all right. I wonder, what do you say to the more conservative Democrats we have in this area, the independents, and even the disaffected Republicans who are looking for a change?
Right. They told me that people in Iowa ask tough questions. I got it. You know, this puts like Meet the Press to rural hospitals, price parity.
He or she take Chuck Todd's place.
You need to talk to Senator Grassley and ask him about the time I confronted him over Obamacare. Then you want to talk about tough questions.
I was just kidding around. I appreciate it. I think it's why I have defended and actually genuinely believe that Iowa being the first caucus is so important, because it gets to, you know, you can't just win on television ads, and you can't just win being famous. You actually have to do this hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, and I think that's sort of one part of democracy that's working. Let me answer your question very directly. I think Bernie Sanders has a broad coalition. I mean, you saw a slight disagreement between the gentlemen, but right before it, we're both passionate about Bernie Sanders. I mean, I don't think anyone would, I represent Silicon Valley with Apple, Google, Intel, Yahoo, Cisco. I call myself a progressive capitalist, meaning I believe obviously in free enterprise, but I think the rewards of free enterprise haven't been distributed correctly, that they've gone to the very top and they've been concentrated in certain areas, and that are not rewarding work and innovation. And that what we need to do is reorient a free market economy that's still going to have economic growth, but is going to focus on communities that have been left out. And we've got to bring prosperity to those communities. Now, that message, and I'm supporting Bernie Sanders, and there are people you know, who are probably to the left of me who are supporting Bernie Sanders. So what is it about Bernie Sanders? I think Bernie Sanders has identified one of the moral issues of our time, that we have extraordinary inequality of opportunity in this country. That the reality is, if you grow up in my district and you're winning an app challenge in 9th grade because you're designing an app that allows you to solve the parking problem for the 49ers by letting people rent out their driveway, and you've created a profitable app in 9th grade, the future and the world look very different to your prospects than if you're in other counties where you don't have basic health care, basic education, basic infrastructure. And what Bernie Sanders is going to do is fight for those basic rights for people to prepare in the 21st century economy. There's still going to be private companies, there's still going to be small businesses, but everyone is going to have basic health care, basic education, basic infrastructure, and we're going to start investing in people's basic rights instead of these overseas wars. I think that's the central message to him. Really, it's social democracy more than democratic socialism. But whatever you call the label, I think the essence of it is how do you have support for an investment in people, to prepare for the 21st century. And certainly that's how I have managed to represent one of the most entrepreneurial districts in the nation and still be very, very passionate about supporting the senator. Let me conclude with this, since we've got a lot of the senator's supporters and a lot of people who may be for some of the other candidates. I think the most important thing for us, though, if I could say two things. One is not to be divisive in a primary that tears us apart once we do have a nominee. I think that would be a disaster to go up against this president. It would be foolish to underestimate this president. He has defied odds over and over again, and I think it's so important that we are unified coming out of the primaries. And the second thing is, I think we have to have some form of an aspirational message. Democrats win. You think of Jimmy Carter, you think of Bill Clinton, you think of Barack Obama. We win when we inspire the nation. We usually win when we have a sense of where we want to go. And I'm hopeful we will come out of it with that kind of a message. Thank you.